Well, are you sick of us yet? As the news keeps coming up with the Cincinnati Bengals, we keep bringing you our insight, our opinions, and we'll be taking your questions too along the way. If you want to send us those on this episode of the Orange and Black Insider, whether that's through a variety of different mediums, the YouTube super chats take precedence there. We'll try and get to a couple of questions, but we have a lot to get to on another episode. We had originally planned on going live tomorrow to do a listener questions live and different things too. But lo and behold, the last couple of days have held a lot of news and headlines for the Cincinnati Bengals. So we thought we'd cover it. I'm Anthony. He's John. John, I appreciate you altering your busy schedule to come on the show as you are the brains of this operation. So couldn't do one without you, man.
I'm so sick of you constantly praising me when you literally run the show and do everything else aside from just talking, which I do. So I'm going to throw it back in your face. If I am making concessions here, at least I do that the Bengals don't. So, I guess we have that.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. It's going to be a lot of love on this show, at least for one segment, for a particular player. But there are questions about another, and it's all at the same position group right now. If the wide receiver position group is a big question mark for the long-term future, so is the defensive end position for the Cincinnati Bengals. And we'll start, I guess, with the latest news first. And we've got Trey Hendrickson stuff, Sam Hubbard stuff. We're going to talk a little free agency, try and take some questions along the way, as I mentioned. And then we have a free agency profile, kind of tying this all up into one nice, hopefully not train wreck of a show, but nice bow of an episode of the Orange and Black Insider. And we are part of the Believe Podcast Network, the National Podcast Network, and our channel is the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. If you like the audio side of things, that's BLEAV. Go subscribe to that. We're putting up more and more episodes as time goes on here and news hits the wire. You can get that through your favorite audio streamer, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. So go get that where you get your podcast, subscribe to it, leave us a review if you could. That would be awesome. Hopefully a positive one. And if you like the video side of things, you got to tune into a couple of Twitter accounts that we stream live to, as well as the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. And then, of course, our YouTube channel, which you can access through the show icon. If you're watching on YouTube, you can get that show icon on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Click that, do the subscribe thing, thumbs up, and check out all the stuff we've got, including some interviews with some of the players that we're going to be talking about, at least one player that we're going to be talking about tonight. So do that. We appreciate it. We appreciate all the support and the eyes and ears that you provide tuning into the Orange and Black Insider. So, John. Trey Hendrickson and that saga just hit a new level on Thursday afternoon. It's been known that the two sides have been talking about a long-term extension. It appears that things are not going well. There have been reports that if the big three they're trying to extend, which is Jamar, T, and Hendrickson, perhaps Trey Hendrickson would be the odd man out, as the Bengals would go with the wide receivers and the younger players of the three. But Trey Hendrickson, extremely valuable on defense, runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year in the NFL this past year with 17.5 sacks. And a guy that has been immensely valuable to this team's competitive run over the last handful of years, now has been granted by the team reportedly to engage in trade talks with other teams around the NFL. And there are so many avenues. We just said this right before we took the other. There are so many avenues we could take this topic. I'll just start with your instant reaction: surprised, not surprised, disheartened, kind of trying to stay calm. I pride ourselves on this show. We try and look at things from a number of different angles, not just one angle, and hot take and all that kind of stuff. We do hot takes here and there every once in a while, but we try and look at things from all sides in our approach to this show. So I'm really curious to what and we haven't talked about this, your instant reaction to this news that hit the wire just a little bit earlier today.
Yeah, more like trade Hendrickson. Am I right?
Yeah. Hey, I'm a fan of puns, buddy. You know that. So
let's just try to lighten the mood here, because the positives are definitely harder to identify compared to the negatives. And I think the appropriate first reaction is it should be a negative one, because bottom line, this was something, paying Trey Hendrickson was something that the organization set out to do this offseason. It was their plan. It has been communicated both privately and publicly. It was something that Joe Burrow specifically wanted and still wants. So the idea of the team agreeing to let a player seek out a trade is extremely rare. The act of doing it is extremely rare. Players have requested trades from this team numerous times over the past several years. None of them have been granted. Everyone has been laughed off. Every time that we covered a player requesting a trade from this team, we always say the same thing. This is the Bengals. They don't budge. They budged this time. They allowed him to seek out other offers. What is happening right now, what is starting, is exactly what the Los Angeles Rams did with Matthew Stafford. And Stafford went out and saw what his market was outside of Los Angeles. He went to the Las Vegas Raiders. He coincidentally met up with Tom Brady in Montana in the mountains somewhere out there. He sought the Giants. He realized that no situation out there, whether it be money or team or both, was going to be better than the Rams. They came back. They restructured a deal. We don't know if it's going to end up like that with Bengals and Trey Hendrickson, but that is essentially what they allowed him to do. They are still of the opinion that they would rather have him on the team, but the reason why that they would even entertain this and allow him to seek out a trade is because they are indeed far apart in these negotiations. And that was my main takeaway from this, is that the only reason why the Bengals would even entertain the idea of trading Trey Hendrickson is if they feel like they can't get a deal done with him. Whereas their price, whether it be average annual value or the guarantees or the real money of the deal, aren't even remotely close to what Hendrickson wants. And you can definitely blame the Bengals for that if the offer is so embarrassingly low, which is not the exact verbiage that Ari Murov has said on the 33rd team, he has been extremely accurate with his reporting with Hendrickson, because he has a connection with Hendrickson's agent. So everything that he said about this situation and how it's boiled up to this point, I do take it as fact. So I do believe that both the Bengals and Hendrickson are definitely far apart with this. And like we said, like, a trade is not guaranteed necessarily, because the Bengals still have to agree on compensation, and there still has to be a team out there who's not only willing to pay Hendrickson what he wants, but also, give the Bengals the proper compensation back. And it's not going to be just like a late day 3 pick, like what the Rams took for Jonah Jackson or what the Chiefs ended up taking for Joe Thuney. It's going to be a little bit more than that, because this is still the Bengals. But I think the fact that they set out to pay Trey Hendrickson, and now they've realized that they're not even remotely close to doing it, it has to be taken as a negative, as a failure from this team.
There is an emotional side and there is a business side to this situation in the NFL in general. I want to remind everybody that Trey Hendrickson still is under contract with the Bengals for next season. So, this isn't the situation where, he's looking into free agency, he's being a free agent, that sort of thing. That's not the situation. So the Bengals do have still some semblance of control here, but the emotional side of me, initially got to the, a lot of the comments we're seeing in our live chats, right? Bengals ownership and, keep your star players, pay the players that have earned it. And, what message does this send to your locker room potentially in terms of paying a player who is producing at the highest of levels right now in his career? So all of that, I still have that side of me that gets frustrated with the team and just they're going, digging their feet into the sand, right? I mean, it's ingrained in this team's DNA. It's ingrained in the ownership's DNA that, like you said, they don't like to lose, especially publicly, a lot of these battles, a lot of these negotiations. They did do something, I guess, in a way, right by the player to say, hey, if we're far apart, you're not happy where things are going, go see what you can get. Go talk to teams and say, hey, we would trade. I don't know if they would divulge exactly what they would trade for him, but I mean, at least go see what they would offer you in the form of a contract. Now, my frustration was calmed down a bit by a very recent tweet by Andrew Whitworth saying, I don't get what the big deal is. If you can go check him out on Twitter, basically noting, I don't see the big deal here. The player wants to go see what he's valued at, and the team can go back to the team with the figures that have been expressed to him, and the team can say yes or no. The business side of things, there's two completely different sides of the coin on this as well. I just mentioned runner-up defensive player of the year. He's been insanely productive since being on the Bengals, joining them in free agency. He was rewarded with an extension as well. So I mean, there are things there that make some sense. And then of course it's the dreaded, over the 30-year-old age mark that probably is the big sticking point, along with probably guaranteed money as well. But the Bengals may not want to have a 3 or 4 year deal on a guy that hits their salary cap, along with paying long-term deals to their wide receivers, and in a way that makes sense. But your defense is in such a bad way these last couple of years. He has really been the only consistent player over the last handful of years, and at a very, very high level. And you're just willing to kind of say, well, go see what other teams think. I kind of still take issue with that. Whitworth brought some nice perspective, especially him being in the league and as a guy who kind of experienced this a little bit himself with the Bengals. So that kind of calmed me down a little bit, but still, this just doesn't sit all that well with me, particularly with more news at this position we're going to cover in just a second. The defense is not in a great spot right now, it would seem, and that's an understatement.
I want to ask you this real quick because I have a larger point to get to, but if the Bengals had extended T. Higgins 2 years ago and they extended Jamar Chase last offseason, and then this news broke, does anything feel differently?
Yes, it does. It would.
Right?
Yeah. It would, because then they would have gotten those things done, and then you can kind of say, well, these are the facts and figures right now, the financials with the team right now. They just paid 2 huge stars on their team, and those guys are in their early mid-20s. This is a guy who's a half a decade older, and in NFL years that's like dog years, right? Yes, it would feel much different, and you would feel as if they kind of stuck to their word, but it just feels a little bit more of the same deal, where it's just like, man, I mean, this shouldn't be like pulling teeth to get these deals done. Even the Burrow deal that was supposed to be a slam dunk, that dragged out a long time. If you remember that too, that was going on for months. So yes, that's my long-winded answer of answering your question. It would feel a lot different had they already gotten these things done. And then you go, wow, man, this is just a tough pill to swallow because the other things have been done. Now they're spinning plates and juggling balls and all kinds of stuff because they're trying to get multiple of these deals done. I don't, with a limited front office and the staffing and everything that they have going on, do the Bengals, I would think it's immensely difficult to be able to focus on all of these things at the same time. Maybe that just simply plays part of this. I don't know.
No, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think in a vacuum, trading Trey Hendrickson has some logic behind it. And we've seen that because not everyone on this topic agrees. I think there is a decent contingent of people who think that the Bengals would be wise to trade Trey Hendrickson if they're going to pay both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I know Jay Morrison feels that way. Charlie Goldsmith feels that way. We have people in our comment section who feel that way. It's not an even split necessarily, but in a vacuum, trading Trey Hendrickson has some sense behind it if you can get the right compensation. You're never going to get the perfect compensation. Like, they're not going to get a top 10 pick, which may be the only thing that could get you a player of Trey Hendrickson's caliber immediately. Like, that's not how NFL trades work, unfortunately. But on the surface, I do understand in a vacuum trading Trey Hendrickson, along with the fact that when the Bengals were at the NFL scouting combine, the main consensus from that was that T and Jamar are the priorities. And it's clear that that is the case compared relative to Trey Hendrickson. It was Diane Rossini who reported this from The Athletic. It was Paul Dehner Jr. who alluded to this for The Athletic. And it's very clear now that after negotiating with Hendrickson and realizing that you're not close, like you said, it is tough, I guess, to focus on getting all three of these done in a timely manner. So the idea of them actually telling Hendrickson to go out there and see what you're worth and then come back and report to us, it's like them saying and confirming that our focus is on the receivers. And that's the one kind of positive I take with this, because it does seem like they're very serious about getting both of those done to the point where they would be willing to do something they've never done before with a talent like Trey Hendrickson and trading him away just to make sure that the other two do get done. That's the one kind of silver lining with this. But I do think that the context of this entire situation and the fact that nothing has been taken care of, that makes things a hell of a lot more uneasy with this.
There's this is a good one from CB on Twitter. How do they stop anyone? I mean, at this point, that's a good question. And I know Willie Anderson just randomly put out a tweet about a game that I think the end score was 58-48 or something against Cleveland years ago with Carson, and Willie played in that game, and they didn't have a defense then. So and oddly enough, that game was decided by Adelph O'Neal pick six of a 58-48 game. But I mean, I understand that. And there was another one here. Where was that other question I saw that I really liked? I'll have to come back to it here, but regardless, it seems as if they are, again, we've talked about how they value positions, right? And there's certain positions that just take precedence. Yes, they value edge defenders, but they love wide receivers. The Bengals, they love wide receivers. And again, the age factor plays into all of this. I guess, like you said, the business side is, hey, there are only so many resources that we have at our disposal here. That this is the order we've chosen. We're going to try and make it work. The other thing that someone brought up to me on Twitter a little while ago was the fact that, hey, I mean, I mentioned the Bengals still have Trey Hendrickson under contract for next year if there is no trade, if there is no long-term deal in place. I think Trey Hendrickson's a pretty stand-up guy. He's a very good football player, pretty stand-up guy. I don't think he's going to loaf it, but you saw and we heard the situation with Jesse Bates where his contract situation in a franchise tag year, he admitted the first half of the season it nagged at him, and then he kind of let it go, and he ended up having a really good second half of the season and postseason that year. But the question remains, let's say nothing comes of this, right? No long-term deal, no trade. What happens with Trey Hendrickson? Does he sit out? Does he hold out? Does he play at a lesser level because his mind's somewhere else? All of these also need to be taken into consideration, even if nothing happens.
Yeah, it's the one thing that they cannot let happen. Like, the worst case scenario here is that the Bengals trade Trey Hendrickson. The best case is obviously paying him after both sides come back to the table, if that happens. But if they can't get a deal done, he can't be on the team, regardless of how much he makes the Bengals better in 2025. They can't let that resentment bleed through the locker room at an even greater rate like it did last year. It messes up the messaging that they've been pushing out themselves without anyone. Like, obviously Burrow's obviously pounding the table and everything, but like, they didn't have to address things of that nature, but they did. And now it conflates it. And I don't want to come off with the impression that they have an excuse in terms of lack of money or lack of resources or lack of time to get all three of these done, because we've been very clear and adamant that that's not the case. And it's true that all three of these deals can be fit with the resources that they have. It's just that if they decided that Trey is not worth whatever number that he thinks he's worth, then that's just what it is. It's never been about a lack of space or a lack of cash. It's always been a thing of valuation. And apparently the Bengals value Trey Hendrickson significantly less than what he values himself at, and probably what other teams around the league would value himself at. And I think maybe the bigger question here, and why I think there's a lot of restlessness now, is that if they're doing this with Trey Hendrickson, you worry if they're going to do the same with T. Higgins, who has more questions in his overall resume, despite the fact of being 4 years younger. So they've already backed themselves into a corner with T, with the way that they've said about the plan with him and the intent of signing him to a long-term deal. If they don't spend resources on Trey Hendrickson and they have money left over to get it across the goal line of T. Higgins, and they don't, then they back themselves into corners so far that they break the laws of physics, and that the atoms of their bodies now go through the wall of the corner that they back through. Like, they cannot let that happen. And honestly, not paying Hendrickson at this point, it only accelerates the timeline when you need to pay T. Higgins.
This goes back to your question that you asked me about, would you feel better if the other two were signed long-term and then this situation happened? Yes, of course. But that didn't happen. And so, I mentioned earlier that the team hates to have this negative PR in terms of losing a contractual battle. That's kind of been in their history, right? But now, if you want to avoid that negative PR, so to speak, you're getting immensely worse PR by not having those deals done and then having this situation crop up. So you're just chasing your tail. And it's a really ironic thing that you would you hate to lose these negotiations. You want to feel like you're the winner, but you're sacrificing much other PR reputation by not having any of them done and then having this situation crop up. So I think that's where the main frustration stems. I think there obviously is a business side of this that you do understand, the age, the money, the other contracts, but things could have been handled a lot differently in a much better way besides this thing coming to the head it did today.
And I do wonder, because it was my initial thought when Max Crosby signed his deal yesterday for
that was the question I was looking for. Yeah.
3 years. I think it's $35.5 million per year in new money. The real details are something like 60 million fully guaranteed, 90 million practically guaranteed. I do wonder if that impacted things, because the timing, I don't think, is a total coincidence. The fact that Trey went to the team today, a day after that deal became public, and a day after it was reported by Ari Mirov, who, again, all over the situation, reported that Trey's number was between 32 and 33 million a year. Did it go up a little bit closer to Max Crosby? Did he anticipated Max Crosby getting something in that range and he just wanted to be a little bit lower, and the Bengals still weren't even remotely close to it? Because I think if most fans had heard that Trey Hendrickson wanted 33 million a year, I think there would be an even larger contingent of people who's saying that he's not worth that. But now it doesn't look so bad compared to Max Crosby, who didn't have as good of a season as Trey Hendrickson did last year, despite the fact that he is 3 years younger. It doesn't look that bad, making a little bit less per year for him. But again, like you said, it's all about optics. The fact that this continues to happen, it's just not a good look.
Not a good look. We did have a super chat from Mr. Generosity, third host of OBI here. Let's get to it, gents. What do you think we can get for Trey if this comes to pass? You mentioned you don't think a first round or a top 10 pick is in the cards here. I'm in agreement with you. And in these situations, teams this time of year get really, trigger happy and want to, strike ludicrous deals with players, but draft capital is quite another thing. And I at this point, I would think, maybe late first, probably a second round pick. You saw what Joe Tooney netted the Chiefs, which was a 4th round pick from the Bears. So I don't really see this as, a huge haul, a blockbuster deal, probably a couple of picks. And hey, we know the Bengals love draft picks. They hoard draft picks, unlike many other teams around the NFL. Maybe if they get a couple of, day 2 picks or something like that in a year that they have only 6 draft picks as of this point, maybe they say that's what we want. They love draft picks. I don't know. Maybe that's where their mindset is, and maybe they feel like they're not losing this thing either way. but this would be a tough pill to swallow if Trey Hendrickson is not in a Bengals uniform next season.
Yeah, you have to look at it from the immediate perspective of the team is worse, and oh my God, you have to replace all 4 starters along the defensive line, which sounds unprecedented. I'm sure some team has done it in the past, even if some of those pieces weren't necessarily good. But the fact that the 2024 Week 1 starting defensive line is going to be, it could be 100% different in 2025 is just absurd to kind of think about. But I do agree in the sense of them wanting more draft capital. I have a hard time believing that they're only going to have 6 picks in this upcoming draft. And if it is a first round pick, yes, it's going to be a late first round pick. But then you're talking about other contending teams. It probably takes out an AFC team in that sense. Like I had, our guy who writes for the Bills, John Helmkamp, he was talking about maybe like a second and a late 4th for the Bills. And I'm thinking if it's the Bills, it's probably going to have to be more than that. Like our guy for the Lions was asking about what it would take to get Trey, and he was offering like a second round and a future 3rd. And I'm thinking maybe that's something that they would consider, because it's definitely hard to ask a team who's going to pay someone $30-something million per year over multiple years and give up a first round pick, even if this is the runner up for the defensive player of the year that we're talking about. So you have to take it into consideration with reasonability. And I think the best that the Bengals can hope for is something like an early day 2 pick, maybe something else like a player and an extra late pick.
I am incredibly interested in seeing who inquires and or potentially offers or nets Trey Hendrickson this year. Is it a team that is rebuilding and, maybe a new coach, new quarterback, and they're kind of maybe trying to ride that pendulum up a little bit? Or is it the usual suspects who are immediate contenders, the Eagles, the Bills, the Chiefs? You're the Bengals, and even though you had major roster holes, especially on this side of the ball last year, you were close this last year. You're close to making the playoffs. You made a run at it. You were close the year before, another, when 1 or so wins out of the playoff picture last year. So you're kind of one of those teams. Is it a contender that comes calling for Trey Hendrickson, or is it a team that is kind of rebuilding and has a lot of cap space, that sort of thing? That's going to intrigue me, and that's going to send a big signal, because if the Bengals are quote unquote contenders themselves and a big time contender continues to, the rich get richer type of thing, that's going to be a slap in the face, really. I would take it as such, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, there's it all matters. What matters is what comes after the trade, like how they use the picks, how they rebuild the defensive line. Because again, in the interim, right now, they would be a worse team, and replacing that production is pretty much impossible. Okay, guys, there's no way they're going to get Myles Garrett. That 1-for-1 deal, the Browns would never accept that. Obviously, the Bengals would take it in a heartbeat, because Myles Garrett is one of the lone edge rushers who's better than Trey Hendrickson. That's not going to happen. Yeah, it matters what they do with the picks that they get, obviously, and who they end up spending in free agency at the position, because you're damn sure they're going to spend on 2 edge rushers now, because they have 2 to replace.
I get your sentiment about the Myles Garrett thing. I almost wonder, though, if the Bengals would say, given their history with the Browns, and having to see Trey Hendrickson twice a year, I mean, on the surface, it's like, yeah, that is a no-brainer. I don't know that the Bengals would necessarily jump out of their seats for that, though, even if that
Fair
opportunity presented itself. That's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass. I don't know, but I tend to do that. But unfortunately, this isn't the only situation at edge defender that the Bengals are facing, as they lost another starter in Sam Hubbard, our guy. Sam Hubbard, by the way, I counted. He's been on our show like a half a dozen times or so, which is just awesome. And every time we enjoy our talks with him, he's cordial. He's really, really awesome. So first and foremost, congratulations to Sam Hubbard on a very good career. I think, despite what his future would have been with the team this next season and the years ahead, I think this was kind of one of the right ways to do it. Cincinnati, I'm retiring a Bengal. I'm from Cincinnati, that whole thing. And, he has brought a lot of memories. So congratulations to Sam Hubbard. We're going to miss him. And unfortunately, I was hoping this segment would be about gushing about his career and reminiscing about the fumble in the jungle and all this kind of stuff. But unfortunately now the Hendrickson news kind of clouds this a little bit because, like you said, the Bengals are now potentially looking at getting 3 new starters, if not more, on the defensive line, depending on what happens with BJ Hill and others. In one vein, that is a good thing because the defense was not great last year. In another, that is a lot to overhaul in one offseason and remain competitive or even try and steady the ship on defense.
Yeah, this is unfortunately the one loss that the Bengals were expecting, because if Sam Hubbard didn't retire, he was going to be released. I think officially he was released and then Hubbard retired, so he didn't breach his contract, and there's nothing like the Bengals can do in terms of rescinding money and all that stuff. But yeah, we've talked about Hubbard being one of the big cap casualties this offseason because of how last year ended, because of unfortunately how the last 2 years have kind of gone for him. It's just been injury after injury. The ankle injury in 2023 that required tightrope surgery, that he still wanted to play and finish the season out despite the Bengals being out of playoff contention. Last year, he suffered a hamstring injury, a pretty bad one in training camp. He played through it throughout the beginning of the season. He didn't play well, but he wanted to gut it out for his teammates. And then his career unfortunately ends with, I think, a torn PCL after he catches a touchdown, right? Who else can say that their last play in the NFL was a touchdown reception, especially for a defensive player? I think he's the only one in the history of the NFL who can say that. But yeah, it's been the story of how his career has ended. So him retiring, recognizing that I probably am not the same player as I used to be. I would still have interest probably in the free agent market if I were to continue playing. But if I can't play at my best and I can't play for the team that I've grown up watching and only played for in my career in my city, then I probably don't want to play at all. And I think this is, in a bittersweet way, the best possible way that this partnership can end, because it's not the Bengals, releasing Hubbard and having an uncomfortable conversation about letting go one of the cornerstone pieces of this franchise who just bleeds Cincinnati and the team. There's no uncomfortable situation with that. This is just him recognizing that it's time to move on to the next chapter of my life. And I'm so happy for him, not even at the age of 30, who's now married, who's now, I think, going to be married, I think, in the spring, and could work with the same Hubbard Foundation and could just have his health and the rest of his life after making millions of dollars. It's awesome.
It is awesome. And Pat McAfee, I think, made a tongue-in-cheek joke like, hey, could this guy be a future mayor of Cincinnati just with his roots and popularity and affable nature? I mean, I think, it's something I mean, maybe he thinks about, I don't know. But like you said, there is a next chapter in his life. The injuries did start to take a toll, but still a very, very productive and loved player in Cincinnati. To kind of go back to the root of the problem here, though, John, not only are you talking about revamping almost the entire defensive line, if not all of it, depending on what happens with Trey Hendrickson, it's not like the Bengals have invested, a lot of high picks and some really kind of proven rotational rushers that this is going to hurt to lose both these guys or one of these guys, but we've got so-and-so waiting in the wings. There are guys that have potential. There are guys that we like, but there are guys that have not proven that they are ready to step up in a full-time role and be anywhere near as productive, particularly as Trey Hendrickson, in terms of pressures, hits, sacks, all of it. So that is another really huge problem, because not only are you trying to replace starters, they're looking to also replenish role players and rotational players that can rush the passer simultaneously. And so if you're talking about the juggling of all the contracts that they're trying to do, you also have to talk about all the activity they would need to do to replenish the defensive end cabinet in free agency in the draft.
I'm just looking at who's on the team right now, and this is the building blocks of the Bengals defensive line if Hendrickson does get traded. Chris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson, Miles Murphy, Cedric Johnson. That's your starting 4 right now. Maybe you start Miles Murphy. I'm sure that they would like to get him on the field more. Probably can't. He showed more at the end of the last year. Yeah. Right. And I mean, another conversation with that is he was drafted at Clemson and he only played along the right side. and then he couldn't play that with Hendrickson. I think trading Hendrickson away would open that door for him to play more at his natural position, which again is a more positive conversation. But still, that is 4 players that I think are worthy of roster spots, but maybe you can only rely on 1, maximum 2 as starters. You need clear answers at least 2 of those positions. You need more depth. You need more upside. You have some contractual control, obviously, with all 3 of them, and that's great. And it gives you room to spend because you're definitely going to have to spend, but it is such a tall task to rebuild this group. And it's unfortunate, like you said, that they don't have a lot of promise that they've drafted and have for cheap. Like they've had to buy their defensive line for the better part of a decade now. And it was easy when you could just extend Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap, but everything else positive has come from other teams. And it's a position group for both defensive tackle and edge rusher that's only gotten more expensive. We just saw it happen with with Max Crosby, who's now the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history before Jamar Chase takes over that title. So it is not a position group that you can just afford to just go out and buy every single year.
And I mean, if you are a contender as the Bengals, if you lose Hubbard, well, they did lose Hubbard. You lose Hubbard, and if you lose Hendrickson in the same offseason, all you're doing is accumulating more need in an offseason where you're trying to maintain and keep this Super Bowl championship window open. You're just creating more need. And that's an unfortunate situation. So I think if the Bengals lose Hendrickson, there better be a contingency plan in place that shows a lot of aggression out there. Maybe that sparks another trade for a player. I don't know. And maybe there is a player for player trade in some fashion there with Hendrickson. Who knows? But regardless, this news, we wanted to celebrate Sam Hubbard, and we are doing that, but it's just now there's more of a damper put on it with the Hendrickson situation and creating more need. Christopher Robinson, thank you for the super chat. I don't trust them with more draft picks. It's been a mixed bag. John just mentioned some of the guys that they have on the defensive line that they have drafted that are waiting in the wings there. And then, of course, Dustin, a longtime supporter, thank you for your super chat as well. Fandom tested. Blackburns are boring. Being inept is a trait. Then it becomes a mindset. They're at the mindset stage. Ooh, Ouchtown, Blackburn family. Population U. Ouchtown population U. But regardless, that's the situation with the Cincinnati Bengals and their defense. And Al Golden has his work cut out for him in one respect or another. So we'll see.
Can I just shout out the comment real quick?
Yeah.
I just want to ask Bryce Schmidt a question from Facebook who says the rumor is that they offered Trey an average of $30 million per year. I just wanted you to cite your source there because I'm very curious as to where you heard that from. If you can get back to us for sure.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, I hadn't heard that, I don't think. But all right. Well, we're going to move on to kind of some free agency stuff here in just a minute. Want to remind folks to get the show on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, part of the Believe Podcast Network. That's BLEAV. You can get it through your favorite audio streamer, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. And you can get our show along with 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin on the channel, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends, and of course Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz. So happy to have all of those people on board on our channel, giving us great content and giving you great content. And of course, please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you like what we're doing. We're going to do more upload videos as well, not just straight live shows. So those will be kind of exclusive on YouTube, etc. So keep it there. And of course, news at cincyjungle.com and A to Z Sports, where John is covering the Bengals over there as well. So John, let's just do a brief glimpse because we have a free agent profile to get to as well. I kind of alluded to it a little bit, saying, there better be a contingency plan in place in terms of high aggression from the Bengals if they were to lose Hendrickson this spring. Is it just going to be? Is this where they're going to remedy the defensive line? You mentioned, a lot of the spots on defense have been through free agency, and heck, they traded for BJ Hill, right? So they've done that before. Does this heighten the pressure to do the same again and hit the restart button through free agency primarily, because they always express, we don't like to go into the draft feeling extremely needy, right? We like to get best players. Sure, we look at positions and positional value and where things are at on the roster, but they like to kind of try and get the best player they think has fallen to them for the most part. So do you think that this is an underlying sign that they are going to be a little bit more aggressive in free agents, outside free agency this spring?
I'll refer back to how Trey Hendrickson got here in the first place. There was the whole saga about the Bengals not tagging Carl Lawson and allowing Carl Lawson to hit free agency. And then Carl Lawson ended up signing with the New York Jets, I think at night, Monday of legal tampering that year. And then I think 30 minutes later, the Bengals went out and got Trey Hendrickson on a deal that was similar in terms of average annual value, but had significantly less guaranteed money included with it. I say that to say that all of what is happening with Hendrickson, it is disappointing. It's not completely, it wasn't completely unpredictable because there were reports hinting at it, but everything that we've talked about the Bengals spending money this year, regardless of what happens with their big three, that hasn't changed. There is still so much cash for them to spend, and there's even more of it to spend if they do end up trading Trey Hendrickson and they don't not only not extend him, but get his contract completely off the books. So yes, they are going to spend a pretty penny along the defensive line. I don't think it's going to be Milton Williams necessarily, because he would be one of the few guys that I think is going to command real guarantees, and that's still something that we have to take mindful of. But in terms of just fake money, like the gaudy average annual value and just the maybe somewhat promises in years 3 and 4, like those players who can only command those types of contracts, the DJ Readers, the Hendricksons, the Mike Hildens, et cetera, the guys who have taken their structures of deals, like they're going to be going after those guys. And I think they're going to go after them early, because honestly, them releasing Sheldon Rankins, Alex Kappa before they really had to, and then now having, Sam Hubbard retire before free agency, they put themselves in a position where like they can't afford to just kind of sit on their hands and wait for a replacement to come down for these guys that they were still expected to move on from. I think the fact that they moved on for them as quickly as they did, it signals that they have targets that they like and that we could see them go after them relatively early. I'm talking about a guard. I'm talking about at least one starting defensive tackle. Now you're probably looking at 2 total edge rushers, maybe one that you would right now trust as a starter more than the other. But like they can't afford to wait around and just let the market kind of come to them when they have all this cash that they're sitting on.
It's an interesting point that you make. It's almost, I don't want to put it this way, but is the power play by the Bengals because they've identified some players in free agency that they think can replicate the type of production that Hubbard and Hendrickson, maybe again by committee, that was their approach with defensive tackle last year. Maybe they thought that, or they think that they can get that kind of production for less money and through a variety of different players that they feel will be available to them on the open market. I think that is a risky gamble, but maybe they feel that there's quality in the quantity, right? Instead of quality in 1 or 2 players. So I don't necessarily wholeheartedly agree with that. There is probably a blueprint wherein that could be pretty successful, and maybe they could also replenish some other spots on the offensive line, secondary, and replenish the cabinets there. But again, it's a risky gamble, and I would hope, because part of the job of being a front office executive for an NFL team is to not just say, okay, here's our plan of attack. These are the guys we've got. These are the contracts we need to nail out. It's okay. Well, you also have to have these plans. What happens if this contract doesn't work out? Where do we pivot? Where do we go? So I would hope that the Bengals, I'm going to trust that they have these because they're a professional organization, but they sure as hell better have some of these contingency plans in place where it's like, hey, this doesn't work out, we're pivoting here. This doesn't work out, we're pivoting here. This contract doesn't come through, we're going to go here. I would like to think that they have that in place. Maybe there are guys on the market that they have their eyes on that they feel like, hey, if we get rid of Trey Hendrickson, these are our 2-3 guys that we feel can replicate a lot of the stuff that Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson brought us.
Yeah, they've had more whiffs in the past couple of years compared to when they first started out, being
Absolutely.
aggressive in free agency. But I think they do have I think they have shown to have decent plans when it comes to identifying guys that make sense for what they're looking for. So again, like, people will constantly say that the Bengals are understaffed or they move at the speed of a sloth, and I understand the perception of that. I truly do believe, though, that everything is there except the willingness to give out real money in these deals. Like, there's no reason why, like, the Philadelphia Eagles, the contract that they gave to Zach Bond, it's kind of like a random example, but still, he got $34 million guaranteed for 3 years, $17 million per year. He probably could get that on the free agent market, maybe by a desperate team, but the Eagles decided to be that team to give it to them. And obviously the Eagles are a team that always identifies the players to pay, and they pay them as soon as possible because they don't mess around with not only lowballing them, but just giving them real contracts that would be competitive on the free agent market. The Bengals still believe in draft, develop, retain. Like, they still, I think, have decent eyes for talent for the most part on the veteran free agent level. Their unwillingness to actually give out competitive offers in that sense, from a guaranteed contract perspective, it's what forces them to pivot to other options, and what forces them to look at players who are, I guess, like someone said, like, they're just B players and expecting them to eventually develop into A players, which is exactly what happened with Trey Hendrickson. And that was a bet that paid off for them. But like we've seen, it doesn't always happen. And free agency is so far from a sure thing, but the best way to make sure that you're getting proven talent is by offering big boy contracts. And this team, aside from Joe Burrow, who had all the leverage in the world, it still won't do that.
The Trey Hendrickson, the B to A type of thing. I mean, I don't want to call it an outlier, but it's not a given, right? I mean, it's somewhere in between. So they need to be aggressive, and maybe some of this was expected with the Sam Hubbard news. And like you said, some of the writing was on the wall with Trey Hendrickson. And so maybe free agency is not so much focusing on replacing those two guys if Hendrickson does leave, but the interiors of both lines, right? Maybe that's where they start to fortify and then replenish. There's some good edge rushers in this draft, and maybe that's where they dip heavy there. It remains to be seen, but it is a really kind of shaky time going into one of the busiest parts of the NFL calendar, where teams really feel like they can improve their roster. And like you said, they have to spend real money, not AAV money and, all this kind of stuff. Players want to see real money right now. And the Bengals, while they are with the times in a lot of different respects, or maybe even ahead of the curve in some others, that is one where they have fallen behind. And I think that resonates throughout the league and with players, especially when free agency time comes around.
It's just a problem that's only gotten worse and will continue to get worse. And I will still stand on this table and say that has nothing to do with the size of the staff, has nothing to do with the knowledge that the personnel department has. It's everything about that antiquated philosophy. It just is what it is, man. And until they can get past it, winning just becomes harder and harder and harder in a league where it's set up for everyone to have an equal chance. The Bengals purposely, for whatever reason, tie one hand behind their back.
Yeah. Well, let's get to a potential free agent option, a little bit of low-hanging fruit, but one that makes some sense, and we'll try and be somewhat brief with it. But this player has a lot of stuff that resonates with the Bengals free agency philosophy, at least through the Marvin Lewis era, which is past their prime, former high pick, still has some left in the tank. There are some questions. Maybe you feel like you can get a big name that is a bit more affordable. This guy just became available, and that is defensive end Joey Bosa. Now, before I pull up a brief video that we're going to talk about, John, you also wrote something on A to Z Sports about this and the connection between the Bosa brothers and Joe Burrow. So maybe there's some connection there. I know the Niners, I think, are kind of trying to lobby to get Joey Bosa over with his brother there. But fun fact, by the way, when I was researching Joey Bosa, did you know that his cousin is Jake Kumaro?
I did not.
Yeah, I found that out. I didn't know that either. So fun fact about Joey Bosa and a Bengals connection there. But talk about your article that you had written up a little bit there on A to Z.
Yeah, I think we've seen this kind of thing before. A former first-round pick, a high draft pick with that pedigree, entering the back half of his career. That means he's going to be cheaper. It means that money may not necessarily be the number one thing that he's thinking about. I do think that the 49ers make the most sense and are probably going to be the favorites here, and I would expect that's where Joey Bosa ends up. But if there's another team that enters the equation, if that for some reason doesn't work out, I think the team that just lost one of Joe Burrow's best friends and an Ohio State edge rusher makes the most sense to kind of help fill that void, and also obviously would need as many bodies on the edge as possible. Joey Bosa is obviously more of a name than a talent for what he is right now, and he was a legitimately very good player for the Los Angeles Chargers for a number of years. His peak was probably in 2021, a year after he signed, at the time, the largest contract for a defensive player in NFL history, but he has missed, I think, 28 games in the past 3 seasons. He played as many games last year as he did the previous 2 seasons combined, which is why I think he got like a sympathy Pro Bowl honor, if you will. But yeah, I think he's always been just a better version of Sam Hubbard, where he doesn't have the eliteness and the athleticism that his younger brother Nick Bosa has, which is why Nick Bosa was formerly the highest paid edge rusher in the NFL. So there's that and how that kind of ages, but I still think that he's worthy of a roster spot, and his salary, he can't demand anything more than half of what he was set to make this past season. So there's affordability, there's a clear connection with him and Burrow, there's a clear need, and there's that pedigree that we talked about that the Bengals clearly value. So I think this makes a lot of sense as that mid-tier free agent option.
And in a year wherein the Bengals may go, like I just mentioned earlier, where they may go with edge rushers pretty heavy in the draft, as opposed to maybe free agency. Maybe they again focus on the interior and free agency, and then go edge rush in the draft. This would be a veteran addition to what would be a pretty young group, and like you said, may be a good option. So let's take a look at Bosa here. Got some stats and all kinds of different stuff for everybody to kind of check out on this profile here. Again, a little bit more of a name, and that picture's probably brings a cringe right there for a lot of people. A little bit more of a name now than an on-field producer, and ironically, not that much younger than Trey Hendrickson, although he does primarily play the left. 6'5", 280, so he's kind of that bigger guy that the Bengals like at defensive end. He's 29, turns 30 in July. He is entering his 10th season, has played 9, and of course went to Ohio State with his brother went there, Joe Burrow went there, etc. Career stats: 343 total tackles, 72 sacks, so no schlub there. 17 forced fumbles, that's pretty impressive. 4 recoveries, 87 total tackles for loss. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler, including this last year, where you go, and he was the 2016 Defensive Rookie of the Year. So, a very good career despite injuries and other things kind of hanging him up over the last couple of seasons. Like you said, I think as the beginning part of his career and the middle part of his career were pretty outstanding, and then some injury stuff hit. Here's the RAS score from way back, 8.9. So like you said, a good athlete, not an absolutely outstanding one, but did show some good metrics in a lot of different ways, particularly the agility. And then of course, the vertical was not good. So, you can kind of take that for what you will. Here's some stuff. This is now here's the thing you're going to note. Nice play chasing down Matt Ryan on the Falcons, though. So this shows you the age. This one right here, this was actually a 5-man front. He was lined up over the right guard and got past him for the sack of Mahomes there. And I I'm going to go back here. I want to go back a sec. The reason I went slow-mo on the other ones and regular for regular speed on this other one is just because I want to show the get off when he was early. I mean, you see the speed was there, right? And then, here he go. As I said, he kind of swims over the right guard, gets past him and brings down Mahomes for a play there. And then the next one here is what was the next one we have coming up here? Oh, Mahomes again. And here he is. I believe that might be Eric Fisher on that side there that he took over, brings Mahomes down. And then, of course, this one and Joe's first game here, just absolutely turnstiles Bobby Hart and brings him to the turf, unfortunately. And the Bengals ended up losing that game. So, again, a guy that the problem with those clips, they're all from 4 years ago, 5 years ago, even longer. There are some good clips of late, but they are far more frequent early in his career. And that's why you kind of come with this with a little bit of hesitancy in it that, you know, what can he give you? He made the Pro Bowl last year, but he had 5 sacks. There's a lot. There are questions, and he's up there in age. So you go, okay, well, even though he primarily has played the left side, not the right side that Trey Hendrickson has played, if you're kind of trying to replicate some of those statistics, where have those been? I mean, 2.5 sacks in 22, 6.5 sacks in 23, 5 sacks in 24. And in 4 of his first 6 seasons, John, he had double-digit sacks. So are you paying for the name? Are you paying for production? I don't know.
You're paying for the name. Like, it is what it is. I think he's better than, even if Sam Hubbard was fully healthy in 2025, I think a fully healthy version of Joey Bosa at this point is better. So there's relativity to kind of assert with that. Again, like, the price definitely matters here. I think his cap hit was going to be around like balloon to like 30 something million this year, which is why he got cut. I don't know what he was projected to take home in terms of actual cash, but I think at this point teams know that he's definitely past his prime, and this is about finding the place where he would be motivated to really finish out his career strong. And obviously he would definitely do that playing alongside his brother. But again, if that doesn't happen, I think going back to Ohio, where there's a lot of Ohio State fans who go to Paycor on Sundays in the fall, playing in the same locker room as Joe Burrow, who they were teammates for a year, and obviously they've remained close in the offseason. I think it was more of Joe having a relationship with Nick because they were at Ohio State at the same time, but that friendship, that brotherhood has kind of just grown over recent years, and obviously Sam Hubbard is a part of that as well. So I think Cincinnati makes sense as a place where you could get him to really maximize what he can do in his final years in the NFL. I wouldn't imagine it's a contract that's more than like 2 years in length, and there's probably an out after year 1 if it gets to that point. But again, you have to just read the terrain of what the Bengals typically look for in signings like this, and I think this makes a decent amount of sense.
So we talked about one of our first free agent profiles we've done so far this year was Chase Young, another Ohio State guy, and questions about him, injuries, but productive at times. Let's just say, and I know Chase has played both left and right, let's just say no Hubbard, no Hendrickson, and these are the 2 guys you net as possible replacements. How are you feeling?
What came in the draft? Because that's not enough. I'll just say it right now.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think you're paying more for names than production. It would be much better than nothing in those scenarios, right? I mean, those are 2 guys that you feel that they could come in and definitely contribute. I just, how much are they giving you in respect that the other 2 did if you were to lose them? So again, low-hanging fruit is the Ohio State stuff and the names and all that kind of stuff. But these are the types of targets, again, former high picks, maybe not lived fully up to potential at times in their careers. Maybe you get them a little more affordable hometown guys that are Ohio State guys. Maybe that's where the Bengals outside free agency wheelhouse sits. And so that's why we decided to talk about Joey Bosa along with Chase Young a couple of weeks ago, but 2 guys that could help. But I don't think that the production they would provide would be 17.5 sacks. Maybe not even combined, so I don't know. But a name I think to monitor, like you said, I think the Niners might be the more logical landing spot, but the Bengals probably are in the mix, I would think, for his services too.
I mean, they're gonna have to be in the mix for all these pass rushers. The more pass rushers that hit the market, the better for them. I think Jermont Jones is another name to kind of watch. Another former Ohio State guy. I think someone that Bengals fans really wanted to sign a couple years ago. He's now on the market. So the more saturated that it gets, the more likely the Bengals are going to be able to reel in probably 2 or 3 of these guys. As they're going to be desperate to fill out that room.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's drop the mic and get out of here. We're already another episode that just zoomed by. They just keep going by faster and faster. We had hit a lot. I don't have too much else because we've touched on so much, but do you have anything for the good of the order as we drop the mic and head out the door, John?
Yeah, I'm thinking more about Sam Hubbard. There's so many memories, I think, of his play, but I think like we got to know him a little bit on this show, and he was always so gracious with the media in general, even when things weren't going very well with the Bengals. He was always willing to talk and everything. And one of my best friends growing up, arguably my best friend growing up, is his name is Ben, and he is the best person I know, I think, to this day. He was an honor roll student. He's now an engineer, but he played football for a year at Dayton. So he was good enough to play college football while being one of the smartest people I know, and just one of the most kind-hearted, good people that I know. And unfortunately, his football career ended a little bit shortly because he focused on being an engineer and being the best student that he could be. And now he's doing phenomenal in that career field. But I'm just thinking that like Sam Hubbard is like if my friend Ben actually made it to the NFL, and he was also from Ohio and from Cincinnati and played for the Bengals. And that makes it more special for me because knowing someone like Hubbard, who's just a complete stand-up person who is always willing to do what's necessary for the betterment of the team and putting himself last, and then to see the team have success around him and how that made him feel and the effect that had on him, and how he can look back and say like, yeah, like my career was a resounding success and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Like those are the people and players that you need to cherish when they're here, regardless of if their play declines and everything like that. Maybe I was too hard on Hubbard at times because of his play declining, but that was just kind of the nature of the business. But yeah, like Hubbard is a special person and he deserves all the flowers that he's getting right now because there are so many people like him that unfortunately don't make it as far as he did, but he did, and he had a career that 90+% of NFL players would only dream of.
Yeah, absolutely. And kudos to your friend Ben, man. Sounds like a good dude. And with Sam, we've said it a bunch, but he was incredibly gracious to us on this show, and he always talked about teammates. It was never really about Sam in his interviews, right? And we talk about the injuries, but there were a number of other injuries he played through that were pretty hard to play through. And again, you got to give him credit for that. We'll miss Sam on the field. Hopefully the Bengals can find some semblance of a replacement, but really, really good story. Ended a little sooner than I think a lot of people would have hoped for Sam Hubbard, but good career, went out a Bengal, kind of a little bit, and even more so like Reggie Williams. Reggie Williams, played for the Bengals forever and played in big games, et cetera, et cetera. Wasn't, the hometown kid necessarily, but he embodied being a Bengal in the best of ways. And I always remember how great he was to us on this show, and hopefully we can have him on again soon to celebrate his retirement. Yes. So congrats, Sam Hubbard. Thank you everybody for tuning in live. We've gone a while today, and we've got a lot of live viewers across a lot of different platforms. Get the show how you can. Check out the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. John, thanks for everything. Thanks for calling an audible and being on here today. And we'll be back with more on the Orange and Black Insider. Take care, everybody, and let's get free agency going.